and what he's been doing, and share that with us here at Occupy. Obviously, we've been inspired by what's going on over there. Thank you so much for coming. And yeah, just excited to
carried away and to look at the very pessimistic side of it. At the end of the day, we were only tens of thousands of the square out of 85 million Egyptians. So if you're always going to say that, you're going to say, oh, 300 million Americans, if 50,000 take the streets, that's nothing. That's a small percentage. But you can't look at it that way. You got to look at the fact that it's always triggered by a minority, all right, of the different classes, different backgrounds. These are minorities, are trendsetters, so to speak. Like, and they take the first step, and then the masses follow, and that's normal. After, well, you may have witnessed Mubarak's second speech. Once Mubarak, he tried different tactics, and it was interesting to see a game of chess between Mubarak and the people in Southby, and he would make one move, and the people, all the Egyptians were watching, and then sometimes they would sway towards him or sway towards us, and it was interesting to see this ongoing strategic battle, because we held the central square of Cairo. We blocked off all the roads. We were hundreds of thousands, even millions during peak time, of Egyptians from different classes, men, women, children, young, old, rich, poor, Christian or Muslim, which is a big one. Like, there was like every single walk of life, Egyptian life, we found there in the square. Mubarak on the February 1st, which was a Tuesday, came up and he gave a speech, and it was a very intelligent speech, because he went up and he said, what's going on is a conspiracy, blah, blah, blah. You know, the same thing that you always hear from any dictator, that these are foreign intervention conspiracies trying to disrupt Egyptian life. But I have decided that I'm not going to run for election in 6 months' time, and that my son will not be running for elections either. And I hope that I've served this country and whatnot. So he started playing on the emotional level. And you guys might have heard of the Stockholm Syndrome. We have a lot of that in Egypt. And I think you might have some of that in the U.S. I wouldn't know. But it's just the idea that you are being exploited directly by the Egyptian government, by this dictator, that all of a sudden the idea of him leaving scares you. We've had a stable dictatorship for 30 years. Why do you want to change that, right? Who's going to come? Who's going to be good enough to be the president of a country that's 85 million people? That's bullshit. That's just retarded. I mean, there are ways to do this. I mean, this is why we get power. We make the choices. Why do we have to be worried about who's going to be the next dictator? And I actually heard from a friend about that there's a talk, and also Fox News were talking about who's going to come after Mubarak. Like, we're trying to bring down the regime, and already Mubarak's friends are talking, okay, who's going to be our friend in the region? As soon as the uprising started, Israel was freaking out, and they said Mubarak needs to stay in power and needs to do everything to make sure Mubarak stays, because they obviously wanted to secure themselves, and so they knew that Mubarak was the ideal person for them. So that was very interesting. So the second speech divided the population, I think. And I got a lot of calls that night. And there were people telling me, okay, Tarek, we've got what we wanted. He got rid of all the ministries. We got rid of the interior minister. Mubarak is not running for elections. His son's not going to be president. Come on, we've achieved what we wanted, right? Let's go back home. Go back home. Let's get back to normal life. Enough with this chaos. Like, there's this anarchic chaos going on everywhere. There are people looting stores. Everyone's at danger, all right? So let's go back home and let's start building the new Egypt. Bullshit. I mean, I got this actually from a close friend of mine who called me and told me that. We ended up fighting with her or what have you. I also got this call from one of my high school teachers who said, okay, we've gotten a lot of progress. Now let's go back home, otherwise it's too much of a risk. It's interesting, at a talk at South by Southwest, one of the talks they were showing the picture of these birds. Now, I'm really bad with animals, and I can't really tell which animals which, but if you help me out here, there's like a group of birds. Yeah, but there's the kind of birds that kind of always stick to each other, and then they kind of fly together, right? And then there's this eagle, right? I think it was an eagle that was hunting. It was a predator, right? And these birds were all flying together, right? And they never separated. They were one entity. They had no leader because it was always rotating. It was someone else leading the way. They never divided. They never separated. And at the same time, the eagle could never get a hold of any of them. As soon as they separate, that's it. He's got plenty of food.
Pick them off.
And that's the thing. And that's why pro-revolutionaries were saying, no, don't leave the square. As soon as you leave the square, the following morning, the police are going to be at your place. You're going to end up in some prison, and we're never going to see you again. We don't want that to happen. Let's do this right. Let's stick together to the very end, and let's not separate. But that was a very positive, that was a very successful tactic from the Mubarak side to throw this card out. What happened the next day? The pro-Mubarak protesters came to the square. What does that mean? Well, basically, you might have heard of the camel attack. I'm not sure if you were following. On February the 2nd, right, a group of pro-Mubarak protesters, and by group I mean tens of thousands of pro-Mubarak protesters, all middle-aged males who looked to become from who looked like they weren't well off. They couldn't afford to live, like they weren't middle class, from what we can tell. All appeared simultaneously. All right, armed with basic weapons. We don't really have guns and stuff. We usually like when we talk about arms, we're talking about like knives and sticks and what have you. Surrounding the square, chanting against us, and then closing in on us, right? And basically, those were thugs. We knew they were thugs. You can tell thugs. And this is a very old strategy of the NDP, of Hosni Mubarak's political party, to use thugs as a tool, because what better way to fight revolutionaries than throwing other citizens who are not in uniform to fight against them? It's genius. It just never fails. But they made one big mistake. I have a video, but I'm not going to be able to watch it because we're obviously not connected. They sent in these people on camels and horses to attack the square, right?
Remember that?
I'm sure if you go back, when you go back home, just do a favor of searching camel attack Tahrir.
I remember that.
And you'll see it. Now what these did was, is all of a sudden this surreal medieval scene where there are camels and horses, people walking in, and they had sticks, and they were beating us from a higher point, but they caused very little harm. In fact, it was a very bad move on the side from Mubarak's end, because that's what indicated to all of us, to everyone, including international media, which, by the way, until then they were calling them pro-Mubarak protesters, and then when the camels and horses came in, then they said they allegedly hired thugs. They came in, and then all of a sudden it became clear these are not pro-Mubarak protesters. These are hired thugs that came to disrupt the movement. Yeah. And when they did that, I got my high school teacher, one of my high school teachers who had called me and told me to go home the previous night, came to the Tahrir Square, came up to me and he said, "I am so sorry about last night. I am so sorry that I asked you to go home. I was very wrong. I was naive. And you know what? I'm here to stay, and we're all here to stay until Mubarak leaves." And the fact of the matter is, when before the camels and the horses came in, when it was just us against them, and they were closing in on us, and they started to fight, and we were throwing rocks back and forth, that was at a point where I actually lost it, and went almost crazy, because I felt like we're losing it. We're losing the revolution. We can't blame the cops. Those aren't cops. I mean, they're hired by the cops, but they're not wearing uniform. Those aren't the government, because officially they're not. They're just a bunch of our thugs. And all of a sudden, this movement is being divided. Well, you got to stick together. And I think we did, because they just got money to come and disrupt the movement. We had something that was a lot more valuable. I mean, we really believed in it. We had a revolutionary spirit. Were you saying something?
Oh, no, just means like I'm hearing you.
Agreeing. That's agreement.
Oh, that? Okay.
Yeah, that's agreement.
And how do I say thank you to that? Should I do this? So that's how it is. And that's why they stayed for hours on end.